they interact with everyone else.
Half of the people questioned said this will affect how they view traveling by air.
Yes, people going on flights, maybe canceling, other people that are working in high-rise buildings, other people that work near symbols of the thing we call America. I mean, a lot of people are jittery. There are going to be a lot of people for a long time really having trouble functioning, just thinking about doing those regular things that they did automatically. I think we've changed as a sense we've lost our innocence, and sadly we're joining the rest of the world in a problem that we thought would never come here.
Mr. Butterworth, thank you very much for being with us as always. And here we are approaching 1:30 a.m. and we wanted to bring you up to date on the latest news at 1:30. Thousands of people, and that's the number now, are listed, considered missing or dead. That number may or may not include upwards of 300 of New York's bravest members of the New York City Fire Department. The search goes on at this hour for survivors at the World Trade Center. We have just had a rescue executed in New York. A Port Authority police officer and perhaps others have been found alive in the wreckage. And the Red Cross here in New York is reporting that blood is still needed. To explain what you're looking at, this is Lower Manhattan now, minus the World Trade Center towers. The light you see is not flame, but it's searchlights being picked up by the smoke and the dust. Again, this is the new New York City skyline, forever changed as terrorists crashed two hijacked jetliners into the World Trade Center and brought down both of the twin 110-story towers. Another hijacked jetliner crashed into the Pentagon in Washington. It is 1:31 a.m. now here on the East Coast, 10:31 on the West, and what has been one of the most horrifying days in American history. Terrorists carrying out well-planned, well-coordinated and executed attacks that have left perhaps thousands dead, thousands more injured. President Bush is vowing to hunt down those responsible. He addressed the nation tonight at 8:30 from the Oval Office in Washington. Now, this all started this morning, 8:50 a.m. Eastern Time, as American Airlines Flight 11, hijacked after leaving Boston Logan for Los Angeles LAX with 92 people on board, crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The gaping hole in the building got the attention, obviously, immediately of the whole city. The top floors were in flames. Then, 9:08 a.m. Eastern Time, United Airlines Flight 175 en route Washington to Los Angeles with 65 on board crashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. It was seen live in some cases, recorded by television crews, capturing the whole thing on videotape, replayed to a stunned nation over and over again. Then 9:30 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, carrying 64 people from Washington to L.A., crashes at the Pentagon outside Washington. One of the building's 5 sides collapses. Tonight, the death toll upwards of 800, it's believed. Then between 9:50 and 10:30 a.m., both towers of the World Trade Center collapse. It is estimated up to 50,000 people work there on a given average work day. Thousands more can be visiting at any given time. Then, 10 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93, carrying 45 people from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, California, crashes 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Amid all this, emergency measures are being taken from coast to coast, including evacuations at the Capitol and the White House. All the while, the FAA also shut down airports nationwide. They remain shut down. It is called a ground stop. We've never used this term before. It's never happened before in U.S. history. The president's location changed during the day. He started the morning. A school event in Florida was moved to an Air Force base in first Louisiana, then to the Midwest, then was brought back prior, really, to the all clear in Washington. It was under some pressure from aides and lawmakers on the Hill that he chose to do the right thing and address the nation as he did tonight, as we mentioned, 8:30 p.m. Here now, the president's speech from the Oval Office in its entirety.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you, good night, and God bless America.
And with that, George W. Bush concluding his speech tonight. That all happened at 8:30 from the Oval Office. The Boston Herald is out with a devastating story in tomorrow morning's editions. Among the three bylines, veteran reporter Tom Farmer. I'll read it to you in part. Authorities in Massachusetts identified at least 5 Arab men as suspects in yesterday's terror attacks launched from Logan Airport, seizing in the central parking garage a car laden with Arabic language flight training manuals, sources said last night. 2 of the men whose passports were traced to the UAE were brothers, one of whom was a trained pilot, a source told the Herald, speaking on condition of anonymity. 2 other suspects flew to Logan yesterday from Portland, Maine, where authorities believe they had traveled after crossing over from Canada recently. Once in the air, the hijackers in one plane began killing flight attendants in order to lure a pilot from the cockpit and seize the plane. They started killing stewardesses in the back of the plane as a diversion. The pilot came back to help. That's how they got into the cockpit, said the source. Suspects had no guns, but used shaving kits and other carry-on luggage to smuggle knife-like weapons made up of plastic handles embedded with razor blades, sources familiar with the case said. That finding is consistent with reports of a flight attendant's cell phone call from one of the doomed airliners. And here's the... People were calling from the plane saying they were getting killed, calling 911, said one source. One stewardess called her husband to say goodbye. That was the scene on board at least one of these 4 downed commercial airliners. Let's bring on our next 2 guests, Cliff Van Zandt, veteran former FBI profiler, and Dan Garay, been with us all afternoon, Deputy Director of the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, also an NBC News military analyst. Cliff, knowing what we now know about what was evidently the scene on board these aircraft, pretty horrific stuff.
It really is. I mean, I'm sitting here and I've thought myself all day long fairly professional and keeping the emotion out of it. What you just read to me, I mean, I'm thinking this is butchery. This is something that's done by animals. This is subhuman to do something like this. This is everything that we like to believe we stand against. And we like to believe that human nature stands against, and to use human beings, again, to lure the pilots out. This is like when I was in Vietnam, we would have children being used against us. We would have women carrying hand grenades across open fields at us. That every horror story of man's inhumanity to man, one more time, is put on our face like this explosive cream pie that we have to deal with. And yet, we're the good guys. We wear the white hats, and we've got the responsibility to put our emotions in our pocket and go out and to investigate this, to identify the bad guys, to prosecute them in court, and not to let ourselves be caught up in our emotions and be drugged down to the level of the people that we're investigating and dealing with right now. And that's the real challenge, Brian, that I think everyone involved in this, when you look at the carnage on scene, and then when you look at a report like you just read to us, the challenge is keeping ourselves focused on the investigation and what our jobs are as Americans and as investigators, and not being caught up in this desire to almost want to go out and shoot a mad dog.
Dan, most American adults carry one form or another of a razor blade, usually, when they travel. Yeah. What to do about that if that is what it took to bring down 4 commercial airliners?
Well, the answer is you can't do anything about that. You cannot be 100% safe. You know, you can, to a certain extent, threaten people with toothpicks if you are really mean enough. The real answer, at least with respect to the airplane, is you're going to have to lock those pilots away inside that cockpit, and they have only 2 responsibilities: safely fly the plane and don't come out. It's one thing when you're trying to protect the people in the back of the plane, as your little scene here shows. It's another thing when the price of coming out is tens of thousands of casualties.
Now, speaking of casualties, Dan, we're going to enter a period here where the time until retaliation can be measured in hours. How much of a hair trigger do you think this administration will be on?
I think that this administration is going to go really onto, as you said, a hair trigger. We won't shoot randomly without good evidence. I'm sure the president is going to want good proof that of who's responsible. But once that happens, I would expect to see retaliation within hours of a decision to respond.
Pieces of the puzzle are now falling into place literally while we're on the air. All day long we've been wondering, why did that fourth flight crash in Pennsylvania? Was it bound for the White House, the U.S. Capitol, God forbid? Well, now we're learning of another cell phone call. A guy calls his wife, the father of 3 children, calls his wife and indicated they were going to try to overpower the hijackers. On that plane, again, it eventually went down in Pennsylvania. Did they, in rushing the cockpit, force it down? Yes, sacrificing the lives of the people on board, but also at the same time saving a national landmark, the likes of the U.S. Capitol, the White House. He said, we're all going to die, but 3 of us are going to do something. He told his wife, I love you, honey, and then the call ended. Unbelievable stuff. And Cliff, we're talking about the United States of America here, and we have just had our world rocked. And what I guess concerns people most, it was such a sad and scary day here in New York, the striking site of the Twin Towers missing. Sure. We weren't calling the tune for a long time today. What was going on in this country wasn't up to us.
No, we weren't. We weren't making the calls at all. We had some, you know, it was one thing when we had Oklahoma City, and we could write that off as 1 or 2 homegrown crazies. In the World Trade Center, the original bombing, we were able to say, well, that was the Blind Sheik and some of his henchmen, and we got them and put them in jail very quickly. But now we had multiple attacks in different areas. I remember being in Vietnam and having an ammo dump go off near us and being under a Jeep at a time, and it was such a helpless feeling that there was nothing I could do. There was nothing we could do about the chaos, and I think that's what America felt today. We were looking at planes hijacked that all of us use for transportation. We were looking at buildings blown up in our very eyes. You know, Brian, looking at that airliner going into the side of the World Trade Center, it reminds me of watching the Challenger blow up over and over again, except then we could blame it on an O-ring. Today, we have to blame it on some skeletal type of organization, some phantom group out there that we only know by a name and perhaps sitting in the desert firing an AK-47. We have to find out who did it. We have to prosecute in the courts of this land, and the military is going to have to prosecute in their own way, too.
Clint, Dan, you've both been terrific today, very patient. We appreciate your expertise and both of you coming on. Thank you both very much. We talked about the aviation world, how we're in something called a ground hold nationwide. That's just one of the ripple effects, the fact that nothing is flying tonight. We have a look at the other ways this nation was affected from NBC News national correspondent Jim Avila.
The nation's landmarks, America's gathering spots, today abandoned as potential terrorist targets, from the Seattle Space Needle and LA City Hall in the west, to Disney World in the southeast, to the world's biggest shopping mall, the Mall of America in Minneapolis, closed. And of course, at the country's tallest building, Sears Tower, and Michigan Avenue in the Midwest, the symbols of American life frozen in fear.
It's scary. Your family's away from home, your kids at school, so it's very scary.
America hunkered down. Chicago's financial district virtually empty. Every sworn police officer in the 3rd largest city ordered to the streets. The nation's workforce turning around and heading home. Larry Hudson works at the Sears Tower.
And I got to the elevator and I said, hey, what am I going up for?
Kelly and David McLean split up to go to work this morning and quickly decided home in front of the television set was the safest spot today.
Now this nation has turned, it's turned upside down. Emotionally, perhaps financially, who knows? It's absolutely, it's one of those moments that you can't believe you actually saw played out.
At America's 5,000 airports, total shutdown.
Ground stop for all airports until 1 o'clock. That means that no airplanes will be leaving any of the airports in the United States.
An estimated 200,000 passengers stranded. At O'Hare, world's busiest, a line of jets held on the runway for hours. No open gates, but surprisingly few complaints.
Being upset about missing my plane, that's trivial compared to people that were on the plane and in the buildings.
Military planes like this one in San Francisco escorting the last of the commercial jetliners safely to the ground. But a crippled air travel system is more than inconvenience. Aviation expert Mike Boyd.
Air transportation is part of our communication system. Today, it's shut down entirely. People aren't moving A to B. Goods aren't moving. Mail isn't moving. And because of that, we're probably going to have a tens of billions of dollar hit on our economy for this quarter.
Phone service strangled too. America's largest cell phone network, with cell towers atop the World Trade Center destroyed, reports call volume nationally doubled.
We can't compare today's events to anything that we've experienced before. We've withstood earthquakes, hurricanes, significant floods, but nothing like today's event.
In Chicago, 800 miles from the attacks, Karen Davis frustrated in her attempt to work at home.
I could not get a signal on my way home, and then I couldn't get a signal on my home phone when I got here. Just really frustrating not to be able to get in contact with anybody.
Among the events canceled tonight, Major League Baseball postponing games from coast to coast. NBC's Tonight Show called off, and the Emmys, scheduled for Sunday, canceled too.
We all could see the gravity of the situation and realize this is a true national nightmare come true, and that a celebration and a comedy show would just not be something that would be appropriate for this country this weekend.
We cannot let it happen again.
Most of the nation's schools stayed open through the tragic day, students watching terrorism on their own shores for the first time.
And I just was asking myself over and over why they did this.
Teachers trying to make sense of it.
There are other places in the world where this is commonplace, and for us it's a first.
At this hospital in suburban Chicago, Americans responding by lining up to donate blood. Midday church services more crowded than normal.
I guess I'm just looking for a peace in my heart and for peace in other people's hearts and from all the destruction.
Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
At SMU in Dallas, older students sing the national anthem at an outdoor rally, mixing tears and patriotism. Experts say Americans should expect a jump in the national anxiety level.
They may be irritable, they may be really very acutely aware of their environment around them and any kind of threats to them.
That report tonight from Jim Avila. At long last, we are joined tonight by a man who's been watching this scene go by from Newsweek magazine and NBC News. Our old friend Jonathan Alter is with us at this late hour.
And the blue. The subway tunnel?
Yeah. The subway.
Yeah.
I saw the building falling down. Saw people jumping from the building from the 100th floor, and I saw the building just coming down. What are you doing?
We just felt a big explosion. I didn't know what after the fact that we talked about, knew it was a plane. I was on the way down. It was pretty calm. There's some small fires, and from the 85 on below, there were small fires and some floods, but it wasn't that bad. And I had just gotten out of the building. I was crossing the street when I heard some rumbling. I saw someone coming off the top of the building. I just ran.
There was nowhere to run. People were just falling down on top of each other. People were, panicking. They were scared. Here's a 100-foot, here's a 100-story building just collapsing, coming down. Where do you run? You couldn't help nobody. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. If you didn't have an oxygen tank, you couldn't even go in there. You couldn't because of the debris. The concrete would just choke you. All this white that you see in the street is concrete. It's concrete. This is all concrete that you're looking at. Everybody's pretty much depressed, but until we actually get numbers and find out what the actual story is, we can only hope and pray for the best.
All right, go down here.
My heart broke. My heart bleeds for everybody in there. Civilians, firefighters, police.
You were supposed to be on the 22nd floor?
That's right.
Yeah, but I don't have a cell phone.
What? You were on your way into work?
And I was late. I guess it wasn't my number.
All right, what are you going to be doing for the next hour?
It wasn't my number.
Just an incredible day, almost unspeakable, very hard to talk about.
Lots of everyday folks downtown, but also lots of journalists, including Rick Folbaum. Rick, you were on the scene immediately after both of the planes had crashed into both of the towers. Tell me a little bit about the morning. Tell everyone about it.
Well, I think that this is something that's going to take me a little while to actually, figure out in my own head before I can talk about it in a way that will make sense to everybody. But we were down there pretty quickly after the two planes had struck both of the towers, before the towers fell. And all I can tell you is that, you're a journalist, but you're also a human being, and all of the emotions and everything that you might imagine come into play as we just stood and watched the two towers burn. We watched people try to escape unsuccessfully, and then we watched the two towers collapse right before our eyes, and it was really something that I will absolutely never forget, and as I said, something that I think it's going to take a little while to sink in.
Well, such a interesting and unfortunately very sad perspective that you and many journalists and hundreds and thousands of people saw today in New York City.
Well, our coverage is going to continue right here on Fox News Channel all night long. We are live. Stay with us.
Mike and Andrea, do you hear me?
All right, welcome back with our continuing coverage here on the Fox News Channel of terror, which has hit the east coast of the United States in Washington and New York City. Terror striking at the World Trade Center as well as at the Pentagon.
And Fox News' Rick Leventhal was there as the Twin Towers came crashing down. And David Lee Miller, I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
Hi there, Rick. It is now a race against the clock to save the lives of those buried under the rubble. I'll have the complete details.
I'm Jerry Alexander, live outside of St. Vincent's Hospital, where we are awaiting the arrival of possibly more incoming wounded. I'll have the latest.
The continues to smolder. The rescue efforts continue here, but the Pentagon continues to operate as a functional director of the military forces around the world. I have a complete report coming up in just a moment.
Team coverage, I'm Rick Folbaum.
And I'm Lori Dew. We want to go over with you exactly what happened on a day that rivals really any of the darkest days in the history of this country. September 11th, 2001, a day that will go down in infamy. At first, it appeared to be a horrible accident. A passenger jet crashes into the World Trade Center, and the race to put out that fire begins.
But just minutes later, a second plane flies around the adjacent tower right next to it and slams into it. And only then does it become very clear that this was no accident. America was under attack, and the attacks extended beyond New York City. The Pentagon, outside of Washington, America's home for national security, ripped by a third plane crash.
And then back to New York, America's skyline changed forever as Tower 1 of the World crumbles to the ground in a plume of smoke, as you see there.
Followed, and then moments later, the plane, as you can see, this is the plane going through the second tower. Just a day of horror in New York City, near Washington, D.C., and in other parts of the country, too, including western Pennsylvania, where a fourth plane crashed outside of Pittsburgh. Apparently, this was a plane that we are told was headed to Camp David, the presidential retreat. But luckily, it didn't get there. It is 2 o'clock in the east, and it is 11 o'clock out west. And we begin our team coverage now with Fox's David Lee Miller, who joins us now live from Lower Manhattan. David.
Hi there, Rick. As Lori said, New York's skyline has changed. The lives of New Yorkers have changed as well, and the lives of all Americans have changed because of what has transpired over the last few hours. Let's go to the camera now atop of our live truck, and here you can actually see what is taking place a few blocks south of where I am standing. This is the site of where the World Trade Center stood only 24 hours ago. Today, nothing more than a pile of rubble. You're looking at it under the glow of special portable lights that have been brought in. The area here has no electricity. There is no gas for fear that there could be further explosions and fire. Now, rescue workers are on the scene, and they are in the midst of a massive rescue operation. Much earlier, their efforts were severely hampered because of fire and an adjacent building that collapsed. Trade Center building number 7 literally fell to the ground, falling on its side, we are told, at about 5:40 this afternoon. As for the World Trade Center itself, it now resembles a pancake, an accordion. We are told that it is now a little more than 5 stories tall. Everyone, of course, is concerned about the survivors, who is buried under that rubble, and what it will take to get them out. Mayor Giuliani has told reporters that a number of people, 2 people, have called their family using portable phones as they were trapped under the rubble. They notified their families in Seattle, so we do know that there are survivors, but it is going to be a race against the clock to get them out. In similar emergency situations, what the authorities have done is they bring in special sniffer dogs to detect the human presence. They also bring in special acoustical equipment to try and listen for cries for help. And no doubt that's the type of activity that will be getting underway in just a few short hours as dawn approaches here. Now, we are told that as many as 30 to 40 New York City police officers died. Those are some of the first officers on the scene when the buildings collapsed. And there are also as many as 300 plus firefighters who died, including the chief of the fire department for the city of New York and the department's chaplain. As I mentioned earlier, this entire area now is without electricity. Authorities are warning people, do not come to Lower Manhattan. This area is going to be sealed off and limited only to emergency crews. Anyone who comes here will be arrested. That from New York's police commissioner. As for the Isle of Manhattan, it also remains sealed off. You can leave Manhattan, but you cannot enter it. All the bridges and tunnels now have also been closed to prevent people from entering the borough of Manhattan. So, Rick, in just a few hours in earnest, we expect that the search and recovery operation is going to get underway. And from the emergency workers we have talked to, they expect to find a very grisly sight. For now, back to you.
David, I know that for a large part of today, there was a prevailing sense of just shock and disbelief. And I know that people there have a lot of work to do, but I'm wondering if you've been able to sense that that feeling is now changing to one of anger.
Yeah, very much so. I'd say it started, as you said, with disbelief, moved to shock, and now there is a great deal of anger. People are talking about retribution. They don't know, of course, any more than the government does who is responsible, but you do hear people demanding that some action be taken because they are fearful. If this is what we're hearing in the street here, that unless something is done, attacks like this will only continue. Rick?
David Lee Miller in Lower Manhattan. David, thanks.
Well, many of the victims from today's attacks were taken to St. Vincent's Hospital. That is the hospital that is closest to where the World Trade Center stood until this morning, where hundreds of victims have been taken. Derry Alexander is standing by with the latest. Hi, Derry.
Hi, Lori. You know, you talk about moods. David was just talking about the mood down there, from shock to horror to anger. I have to tell you that the mood up here is very, very different. I mean, we're in front of a hospital. The mood here, I would say, is very one of peace. People are very peaceful and one of very high spirit. It's just sheer determination and belief that there will be more people to recover, more people to treat out here. Let me just give you these numbers real quick. 365 people have come through this hospital today. Think about it, Lori and Rick. That's not really a great number considering the fact that we're talking about 50,000 people that were potentially working in those 2 buildings today. 362 people they treated. So they obviously are wishing that there could have been more people up here that they could have treated, indicating that, just giving you a sense of what the death toll could possibly be. Other numbers, 4 deaths. 4 people died inside this hospital today. 1 was a firefighter. We understand 50 serious injuries here, inside of here today. 45 of the victims were rescue workers. We have had massive volunteer efforts out here today. 500 doctors from all over, from the 5 boroughs, from Connecticut, from New Jersey, from upstate New York, 150 nurses from all over the place, people showing up. We talked about something else, Lori, you asked me about. They don't need blood. Just, that's absolutely incredible when we were talking all over the country. Give blood wherever you can, and we're going to ship it to New York or to Washington or to Pennsylvania. They don't need blood here. So many people have showed up to donate blood. They had a line that was 5 hours long. So they are doing very, very well as far as blood is concerned. They're doing very, very well as far as staffing is concerned. We just really need to know that there are people alive under that rubble. People have been very, very hopeful. Just a complete mood of peace here. In fact, as we've been standing out here, lots of owners of delis have come up to us, offered us coffee, offered us sandwiches, offering everyone all kinds of things up here. And if we could just slowly get a little shot of this, I want to show you. There were some major trucks coming by through 6th Avenue here just a while ago. They had huge trucks that were loaded with these. See these floodlights? These floodlights